Hi everyone, my name is Angie and welcome to my channel, Angie Rose Nomad. Today I have a new True Crime Tuesday video for you guys, and that is the case of the Van Breda family murders. But before we get into their story, I did want to make a quick announcement that going forward, I am going to be posting a true crime video every Tuesday and Saturday. I am aiming for it to begin this week, but it will start no later than the first week of March, so stay tuned for that. So without further ado, let's jump right in. Martin and Teresa Van Breda were both raised in South Africa to very well-off families, but Martin didn't really rest on his laurels. He was a businessman through and through. He had multiple businesses, mainly in security and properties. And he was actually very cautious about his own security as well as his family. But Martin was described as being a good man that was really concerned with developing and uplifting communities. And through his hard work ethic, he made a name for himself and put away enough money to live very, very comfortably, shall we say. His wife, Teresa, was a former IBM computer scientist, so she was extremely smart and dedicated, and she loved cooking. That was one of her favorite things to do. In the early 90s, Martin and Teresa decided to start a family. So sometime around 1992, their first son, Rudy, was born. And then on November 1st of 1994, they welcomed their second son, Henry. 4 years after that, they would welcome a daughter named Marley. Now, this family was extremely close-knit. They were loving. They loved spending time together. They loved playing games and would vacation together even as the children got older. Simply put, the family was inseparable. In 2007, Martin, Teresa, and their 3 children would move to Perth, Australia for Martin's work. Altogether, the family spent a total of 8 years in Australia. Now, Rudy would go on to attend the University of Melbourne for a master's in engineering. And 2 years after he went, his brother Henry followed for his degree in physics. Martin and Teresa decided they wanted to be closer to their sons, so along with Marley, they moved to the Sunshine Coast in Australia. However, they really wanted to be closer to their family that they had left behind in South Africa. So in January of 2014, Martin, Teresa, and Marley would move back. Now, Martin also wanted to move back to be able to do more work functions. He had multiple different things going on, so I'm not sure which company wanted him to be back in South Africa, but I think what he was starting or had started in Australia was going well, and he could oversee it from South Africa. So like I mentioned, Martin was extremely security conscious, and he wanted to be able to protect his family. South Africa is notoriously high for their murder rates. I believe that is 49 people are murdered every day in South Africa. And he also had the money to be able to afford a nice residential area where he could feel safe and protected. So the family found the Delzalzi Golf Estates. And this community was gated. It was constantly monitored. The only way you could get in was with a key card, and it was also surrounded by electric fence. Martin and Teresa thought that this would be the perfect place, so they decided to settle at 12 Hoske Street in Stellenbosch, South Africa, which was really close to Cape Town. In August of 2014, Henry would return from Australia on a gap year, and then in December of the same year, Rudy would join his family in South Africa for the summer holidays. Now, they were constantly spending time together throughout this time. They were, doing outdoor activities, just really enjoying each other's company. So January 26th of 2015, Henry arrived back home to their estate at 6 p.m. that evening. And when he walked in, he noticed that Teresa was cooking in the kitchen, Rudy was out for a run, and his sister Marley was upstairs working on homework. But he and his father just sat back and had a couple of glasses of red wine each, and Henry would also have a whiskey. Around 7:15, the family all gathered for dinner, and they had dinner between 7:15 and 8 p.m. So after dinner, the family wanted to test a new sound system that they had, and they put in Star Trek 2. So the boys and Martin and I believe Marley were all watching this movie while Teresa was on the phone with her brother. They were all just relaxing and enjoying their evening. Henry was having another drink. I think this time it was a rum and coke, and just enjoying spending time together. Martin and Marley would go to bed around 9 p.m., and then later at 11 p.m., the boys followed. So Rudy and Henry shared a room in this house, and according to Henry, when the boys went upstairs at 11, Rudy went right to sleep while Henry was watching a show on his laptop. Now around 3 a.m., he decided he was getting a little bit tired, so he put on some music, and then he would take a trip to the bathroom. On this trip, he would also have his cell phone with him. While he was in the bathroom, he heard a noise, so he cracks the door just a little, just so he can peek out, and he sees an attacker attacking his brother Rudy in bed. Henry is crippled by fear, and he's trying to call out for help when the light suddenly comes on and he notices that his father has come into the room to assist in what's going on. So according to Henry, Martin rugby tackles this attacker over Rudy's bed. So the attacker is on this side of the bed and Martin is on this side of the bed, and he goes head first at this attacker who is attacking his son. Now because of this, he was attacked himself. So the attacker would go on to leave the room and attack Teresa in the hallway just outside the boys' bedroom. He came back in and saw Henry standing there and laughed a bit and then rushed at Henry. Now during this time, Henry has been paralyzed by fear, but when the attacker comes at him, he suddenly springs to action and this crazy fight ensues where they're wrestling with an axe and then there's a knife that comes into play. Henry gets stabbed. He wrestles the axe away from the attacker and the attacker leaves the room. So Henry follows this attacker into the hallway where he notices that his sister Marley is laying on the floor with some pretty bad injuries of her own. Now the attacker runs down the stairs and Henry, who has wrestled the knife and the axe away from this intruder, throws the axe after them down the stairs. Now their stairs are kind of an L shape. So, you have one flight going like this, you get to a middle landing, and then the other flight would go this way. So Henry is at the top of the staircase and throws the axe down to the retreating intruder, and it lands in the wall on the middle landing. Henry would later go on to say that he got off, I believe, a blow to the attacker, but he said that he injured the attacker, and that's why they began to retreat. He would go on to text his girlfriend Bianca at 4:24 a.m. that said, "Emergency, please pick up your phone," before calling her. At 4:27 a.m., Henry Googled emergency services in South Africa. He then typed a phone number incorrectly a couple of times before calling Bianca again. And both of these times he did not receive a reply. He then claims that he passed out, and when he woke back up, it was about 7:10 a.m. He noticed Marley was moving, I believe, her left side a little bit, and he called the 112 operator, which is the equivalent of the 911 operator in America. And this emergency call makes my teeth grit.
107, what is your emergency?
I need an ambulance. Lots of
You need an ambulance?
Yes, please.
What's your name, sir?
Henry from Breda.
Henry. What's the contact number you're phoning from?
My home phone number, but I'm not sure what the home phone number is. My cell phone. We're at 12 Husker Street, please.
What is this number that you're phoning from? Is there someone else that can speak if you're not able to?
No.
Who else is in the house?
There's no one else.
Everyone else. I need the contact number, please.
Yeah, okay. 021.
021.
8800.
8800.
493.
493. And you need the ambulance to go to what?
Number 12, Husker Street.
Hoskes.
Husker. G-O-S.
G-O-S.
K-E.
What area is this?
It's in Stellenbosch, and it's in the Zolta estate.
Number 12, Hoskes Street in Stellenbosch.
Yes.
I'm not picking it up for Stellenbosch. I'm picking it up for Boertesig Milnerton. Is there a garage, a school, a church near to where you stay?
There's just across from there's a mall.
What's it called?
Eikestad Mall. No, not Eikestad Mall. There's a BP across from me. I tried. There's also a golf club on my phone's maps. That's what it's called.
The golf club.
Yeah. It's the estate next to Techno Park.
Next to Techno Park.
It's by Jamestown as well.
What? And you, the patient?
No, my family is. Someone attacked my family.
Hey?
Someone has attacked my family in my house.
Okay, so you need the police or the ambulance.
And an ambulance, please. Yes.
Now, who is injured?
I think everyone.
Everyone in your house?
Everyone, 4 people, yes.
Adults, 2 adults?
2 adults and 3 adults and 1 teenage girl, yes.
What are the injuries?
Head injuries.
Are they conscious?
I don't think so. My sister's moving, but that's it.
With what were they attacked?
An axe. I think I blacked out and I've just woken up.
Okay, what kind of injuries is there?
My family and we were attacked by a guy with an axe.
With an axe? Unconscious, it is. Unconscious, huh?
Yes, and bleeding from the head, please.
This call lasted 20 minutes, and the way that both parties were acting on this call seemed extremely unusual. Henry was very nonchalant. He had no sense of urgency in his voice. He was sitting at the kitchen counter while he made this call, and the operator was more concerned about an address than finding out what was going on. Henry told her that the address was 12 Hoska Street, which she could not find in her system. So he was very patient with her and he gave her alternate addresses. He even volunteered to sit outside until the police got there or, wave them down on the corner. And he was even providing landmarks to her, saying that it was across the street from a BP, there was a church nearby. So later on, the 112 operator would come out and say that she thought it was a prank. So that's why she was kind of just going along, going with the flow. And while I understand that people deal with stress differently, there is no way that I would have acted as calm as Henry was on this call. She even said that it's very unusual for people to act this way. I would have been freaking out. I would have said, I need help right now, and then provided the address. So he finally hangs up with the emergency services operator, and at 7:38 a.m. he phones Bianca again. Now there is no record if she answered this call or not. So police would finally arrive to 12 Hoska Street, and they would see Henry sitting outside with blood on his socks and gym shorts. They would rush inside the home where they would unfortunately find 54-year-old Martin Van Breda, his wife, 55-year-old Teresa Van Breda, and their son, 22-year-old Rudy Van Breda, all deceased from wounds to the head and neck. And the types of wounds that they received, it would have taken incredible force and strength to obtain them. They did notice that 16-year-old Marley was fighting for her life, so they immediately rushed her to hospital, where she was placed under protection of a guard and put into the intensive care unit. She did have multiple head injuries and her jugular vein was slashed, but she would make a remarkable recovery. She did suffer from retrograde amnesia, so she was unable to recall anything of that night. DNA was found under the fingernails of Henry, linking him to both Rudy and Teresa. And there was also DNA found in the boys' ensuite shower of Rudy, Teresa, and Henry. Now, law enforcement started to suspect something might have been a little bit off at this point. They speculated that the DNA was actually blood because it was much harder to clean up with just soap and water, but they did find chemical in the bathroom indicating that someone had tried to clean up.
The moment you walk upstairs, you see the blood spatter and stuff, and then you think to yourself, what happened here? What went on?
Detective Sergeant Marlon Apollos has been a policeman for 14 years.
It was particularly vicious, wasn't it? It was.
Yeah, I mean, to get a whole family axed dead to death, it is difficult. You wouldn't expect a crime like this to happen in a security complex in a place like Stellenbosch.
But when he's telling you this story, are you thinking to yourself, wow?
Is it possibly true? Can it be what he's telling me? Can it be the truth? Well, to me personally, I said to myself, no, this can't be.
You knew.
Yeah, I knew this can't be. But I can't just say to you, no, you are lying.
So while all this is going on, Henry is giving his statement to law enforcement. He said that an intruder broke into the home through the unlocked back door that they kept open for their maid, and the attacks began. He said that the intruder was black, wearing dark clothes, had a baklava and gloves on, and spoke in Afrikaans. So police had to investigate all avenues, but they really weren't buying the home invasion gone wrong. For one thing, there was nothing taken from the house.
Detective Sergeant Marlon Apollos and his team always felt Henry's story just didn't stack up. Right from the moment he claimed an intruder broke into the family home.
There's no breach of security, the house has not been clearly broken into, and nothing's been taken. And all the valuables are on the bottom floor.
Yeah, most of the valuables were down at the bottom floor. There was watches lying around. There was Teresa's handbag was downstairs on the table. Nothing was taken.
The first floor of the home was this open concept floor plan where the main door opened into like an entryway where there were the stairs on the left, a living room on the right, and the kitchen in the back. Now, for anyone to have gotten up the stairs, they would have had to pass this little table where a purse was sitting. But the purse wasn't tipped over, the contents weren't rummaged with, nothing like that. There was nothing missing from the home. Henry would say that he got a blow-in to the attacker with, I believe it was the axe, but the only DNA found inside the home was that of the Van Breda family. So on February 5th of 2015, the funerals for Martin, Teresa, and Rudy are held. On February 8th, it comes out that Henry's wounds may have been self-inflicted. And there's also a rumor that comes out with this that says he actually went to a drug rehab in Cape Town for an addiction to tick. Now, we would know tick as crystal meth. Some of the side effects would include depression, aggressiveness, hallucinations, or delusions, and psychosis. So by itself, tick is pretty dangerous, but when combined with alcohol, it can be extremely deadly. 5 months after the attack, Henry gets to see his sister Marley, and then he would eventually move 140 kilometers away where he would attend this culinary program and meet a new girlfriend by the name of Danielle. Now, Danielle said that Henry was very kind and compassionate and didn't like to see anyone hurt. She didn't hear about his family until it was on the news, and she immediately sided with Henry's version of events. But there were some people who didn't side with his version, and that would be law enforcement. They finally had their case against him all ready and set to go. Now, they approached his lawyer and said, look, you either tell your client to turn himself in, or we will come after him and arrest him, and it will not be pretty. So Henry did just that. On June 13th of 2016, he turned himself in to law enforcement. He was released on bail the very next day. He got told that he couldn't leave this certain area. On September 6th of 2016, he and Danielle were actually arrested on possession of daga, which is marijuana. And then on September 9th, he would go into the Western Cape High Court to face the charges of murder. That was simply the plea and the pretrial hearings. His actual trial did not start until April 4th of 2017. The prosecutor was a woman by the name of Susan Galloway, and the case was presided over by Judge Suraj Desai. He pled not guilty, and his trial would last 66 days. Now, what the prosecution didn't see right away was a clear motive. They thought that maybe his parents got fed up with his drug use and threatened to cut him off. And there was actually a neighbor by the name of Stephanie Optov who came forward and said that around 10 p.m. to 12 a.m. on the night of January 26th, she heard raised voices coming from the house. So Henry had to find some way to explain this, and he said that It was actually Star Trek that Stephanie heard, because they didn't start the movie until 10 p.m. that evening. His father was working at 8. And don't even mention the inconsistencies from his police report earlier when he gave a completely different timeline, because that report was wrong. He said that because of the language barrier between him and the police officer, the timeline was all screwed up, but he provided the correct timeline. But here's the thing. If that were to happen in my family, I would make sure to read every single word just to make sure that they had everything correct so they could focus their attention on what actually happened. At the bottom of the page, Henry had to sign his consent, saying that everything in that police statement was accurate, and he did just that. Now we're getting into what I think happened in the early morning hours of January 27th. This is my own personal theory, so it should no way be interpreted as fact. What I get hung up on every time is the motive. I see some validity in him being angry at his family for cutting him off from his money, but the attack, as we clearly know, started with Rudy. And it also seems that Rudy's death was trying to be covered up.
His version of having stood inside the bathroom behind that door could not have possibly been, because there was no blood spatter around that door, on the door itself, but there were blood spatter on his clothes. Socks, boxers, shorts, it doesn't matter. You can't have the one and not the other.
So, Rudy was asleep in bed when he got 2 blows to the head before he could raise his hands in a defensive position. He did have a defensive wound on his left pinky finger. When Rudy's body was found by law enforcement, it was actually on the floor by Henry's bed. So the way the boys' rooms were set up was that there was the door to the hallway, then Rudy's bed was first, Henry's bed was here, and on the wall opposite, the door to the ensuite was right near Henry's bed. So Rudy was found on the floor, and there was a duvet cover found right beside him that had been placed there afterwards. There was blood under the duvet cover. So I believe that Henry attacked Rudy and was trying to move him into the bathroom to clean up this scene when Rudy made some noise to alert his father, Martin, that something was going on. Rudy's death was extremely brutal. He had multiple wounds to his head and neck, and actually took 2 hours and 40 minutes to pass. So when Martin comes into the room, he is facing into the room and Henry is facing toward the doorway to the hall. They are looking at each other over Rudy's bed, and Martin rugby tackles Henry and his back is exposed. So Henry gets in 4 blows to his head and neck, which is why Martin had no defensive wounds on him. Then Teresa and Marley were found in the hallway right near the boys' bedroom. Teresa had a defensive wound on her right thumb, and Marley put up the fight of her life. She had multiple defense wounds on her body. So after the murders and attempted murder were complete, Henry would throw the axe to the middle floor landing into the wall there. The prosecutor actually said that this looked staged, like it was put there on purpose and not like you were throwing it after someone. He would then go up to his ensuite and try and clean up a little bit, which is how the DNA evidence got into the shower. Then he would make the phone call to his girlfriend Bianca.
To have passed out for nearly 3 hours, was that considered possible?
If one thinks about the rivulets of blood that dried on Henry's chest, those droplets didn't deviate. So if he had passed out, one would have expected the path of the blood rivulets to change, and that didn't.
So he passed out sitting up?
Sitting upright, yes.
And then eventually he would make the phone call to emergency services. I believe that he was very nonchalant because he was trying to make sure that Marley would pass as well, leaving no witnesses behind. It also came out in trial that a mobile phone was used to search for information about axe murders, in particular the case of Christopher Picow, who was charged with the murder of one parent and the attempted murder of another parent. And I'm wondering how far in advance this was done, if this was done on the same evening as the murders occurred, or if it was a couple of days, just to get a time frame on the premeditated side of this case. A clinical forensic pathologist actually determined that the wounds Henry received would have been self-inflicted because the only way he would have gotten them would have been by standing perfectly still. They were horizontal and superficial, and that the blood that he had on his socks and shorts were indicative of blood splatter from being close to a person when the wound was struck. So in other words, let me clean that up a little bit. He would not have gotten that blood on him from just checking on his family. He would have had to have been in close proximity to both Rudy and Teresa when they lost that blood to have it on him the way that it was.
Henry's injuries were analysed by forensic pathologist Dr. Marianne Temensma.
You know, if you think you were just involved in an altercation, a physical fight, a struggle for life and death, you know, people holding onto each other, you would maybe expect to see bruises around the forearms, around the upper arm as you're pulling and pushing, but nothing.
So
Yes.
for Henry to get away with this,
No, as you say, he
unbelievable.
must be the luckiest man alive.
When Henry faced court in March last year, he was pitted against no-nonsense prosecutor Susan Galloway. In an extraordinary courtroom moment, she insisted Henry reenact his version of the crime.
That is opening up there.
Most people, if you're in that kind of an altercation, will tell you, listen, I don't know what blow followed what blow. I just knew he was coming at me with an axe, which I managed to take from him. He was able to give almost a choreographed version of the arms and the hands and the weapons.
So Judge Desai actually summed up the case in 5 hours and called Henry an unimpressive witness. He did not believe a single thing that he was selling. On May 21st of 2018, he was found guilty of the 3 counts of murder, the 1 count of attempted murder, and the 1 count of obstruction of justice.
You have committed crimes with a degree of unbridled violence. The violence directed against your own family, killing 3 and causing serious harm to the 4th. The weapon used against the deceased and the injured was an axe, with the victims unarmed and defenseless. It was a cold-blooded murder. The violence was excessive and gratuitous. It was intended to cause maximum harm. The 3 victims died with the wounds caused by the axe you wielded against them. The 4th survived, albeit with serious injuries. The clear intent was to kill her as well. We have no explanation for what you did. You have displayed no remorse. We have heard extensive evidence of the consequences of your conduct, the cruel consequences. Yet we have no explanation from you. No substantial and compelling circumstances have been placed before us. There appear to be none. Whatever the statutory minimum sentence regime, the same severe sentences would in any event follow. And I say this with some regret, although you are relatively young and with no previous convictions, your conduct warrants the severest possible penalty. Society expects no less. The crimes warrant such a result. And your circumstances, personal circumstances, are not sufficiently compelling to come to any different conclusions. In the result, on count 1, the murder of Rudy van Breda, you are sentenced to life imprisonment. On count 2, the murder of Martin van Breda, you are sentenced to life imprisonment. On count 3, the murder of Teresa van Breda, you are sentenced to life imprisonment. For the attempted murder of Marley van Breda, you are sentenced to 15 years imprisonment. On count 5, obstructing the course of justice, for the administration of justice, as set out in the charge sheet, you're sentenced to 12 months imprisonment.
And he was immediately taken into custody instead of, having a bail and then coming back for his sentencing phase. Henry's sentencing took place on June 7th of 2018, where he was given 3 life terms for the murder of Martin, Teresa, and Rudy, 15 years for the attempted murder of Marley, and 12 months for the obstruction of justice charge. And all of these he can serve concurrently. On November 7th of 2018, the Supreme Court of Appeal denied his leave to appeal his conviction and sentence, so he will remain in prison the rest of his life. I'm curious as to what you guys think happened in 12 Hoska Street in the early morning hours of January 27th. Let me know your theories down in the comments below. I want to thank you guys so much for watching this video and listening to the story of the Van Breda family. If you liked this video, please let me know by giving it a thumbs up and subscribing to become part of the tribe, and I will see you in my next video. Bye.